Welcome to our little chat about our experience in modern macOS security in higher education. My name's John Ross. I am a senior endpoint security engineer at the University of Nebraska. I've been doing macOS stuff at the university for much of the last 15 years, kind of starting in workstation support, client services kind of role for our fine arts college at the Lincoln campus. I was part of the first Jamf Pro setup for the college, and then it kind of expanded into Central ITS, and I followed along there. And now we've kind of moved into the ITS security team, and we still manage the Jamf Pro implementation. So I've still got one foot pretty firmly in the Mac admin world, and the other kind of squarely in the network access control space. So a couple of services that I own, and I'll let Quentin introduce himself.
Hello, my name's Quentin Harouff. I'm an endpoint security engineer at the University of Nebraska as well, on the team with John. I've been doing macOS management for probably 5 years, and I got my start in IT in the Help Center at Nebraska, doing kind of technical support, and kind of slowly made my way into kind of the Mac management world. So this is my first time speaking at a conference other than an online JNUC, so I'm excited for this. So yeah.
All right, so today we're going to kind of take a top-down look at our approach to endpoint security at the university. So we'll kind of just do a little bit of a historical look at how we got to our current position. Then I'm going to take a look at the role-based network that we implemented over the last few years, and kind of how we're protecting endpoints from the outside through the network. We're going to dive a little bit deeper into how that role-based network and our endpoint management systems interact with each other to kind of make decisions about endpoint security at the network level. And then finally, Quentin's going to talk kind of about the real meat of things, how we're deploying our baseline security controls on Macs. So just a little bit about the University of Nebraska. We're truly a statewide organization. We've got 3 main campuses in Lincoln, Omaha, and Kearney, Nebraska, but then there's an additional 38 sites spread out across the state, mostly research extension locations at county seats across the state. And we also have 2 smaller sort of technical campuses for agriculture and veterinary sciences. Across the whole state, we've got networking gear in 325 different buildings. We serve over 51,000 students and faculty staff base of more than 16,000. So a pretty big people footprint. Just a little look at kind of our security advancements over the years. So back in around 2009, we started thinking about consolidating some of our security teams together under the umbrella of security operations. So that first operations team comprised our firewall and VPN team, the antivirus and email spam filtering groups. Rolling forward a little bit, in 2013-14, that academic year, our IDM team, identity management team, implemented multi-factor authentication for our single sign-on platform. A couple years more down the road, we made some kind of big steps in the governance, risk, and compliance area, and also our cloud and app security team, really kind of looking at event detection and response. During the pandemic years, early pandemic years, 2020 to 2021, we did some big kind of endpoint security things, both from a policy level, and also this is when we did our massive network changeover. We actually replaced all of the networking gear across the entire state, all 3 campuses, all of those outstate locations. It was a bit of an overhaul. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And then over the last year, 2022 to 23, more kind of policy-driven things, our Office of the President signed the first major update to our acceptable use policy in about the first update in about the last 20 years or so. And then there was a huge policy library kind of built around that executive memorandum. This is also when we started working on our implementation of some risk-based endpoint security stuff that we're now slowly rolling out to the 33,000 endpoints that we currently have enrolled in management at the university. And I guess I don't really have a whole lot to say about this particular slide. It's just kind of a graphical representation of the policy library that we developed kind of around that Executive Memorandum 16, the acceptable use policy. And all of it is sort of designed around NIST standards, 853, 171, 207, and then, for those situations where specific regulations are coming into play for our researchers. We are a research university, so we work to be sure we're in compliance with those regulations as well. Our endpoint security model is really driven by a kind of a three-legged stool within security. So we've got our governance, risk, and compliance group, building up the policy and asset inventory information, and also our security awareness training. Building on top of that is the preventive security group, the engineering group where Quentin and I serve with our endpoint management and network access control layer, our ID management group. And then the third leg of this collaboration is our detective security group, the security operations team that are looking for those vulnerabilities, the event detection and response. Digging in specifically to our endpoint management, this is again a real kind of hybrid collaborative model. So like I mentioned earlier, Quentin and I are on the security team, and so we provide kind of the base of the layer cake of our endpoint model. So we're managing the MDM platform. We're a Jamf shop, and providing an endpoint baseline that gets set out to every endpoint that enrolls in management at the university. So we maintain that core baseline service. Then building on top of that, we have our IT client services and distributed IT workstation support partners. While we have a little bit of a fragmented client services model at the university, we do have a central client services, and they provide support for some departments, but a lot of departments still have their own in-house IT staff. So those partners are doing the things for their endpoints that make their departments unique. The special customizations that they need, the software that their users need. And they're also providing the user support and making sure that those devices are enrolling into the MDM and also onboarding properly onto the network. So it's been a really successful partnership, and a key part of that is the training that we've developed around this. And you can kind of see some of the stats up there. We put together quite a lot of procedure documentation on the network side, more than 100 pages of onboarding documentation. And on the endpoint management side, significantly more. I think we're actually up to over 300 pages of documentation for how to support devices through SCCM and Jamf Pro. And then we distilled all of that documentation down into some more digestible training courses that as technicians work through those, they complete one of the training courses and they get access to more tools, basically. So there's kind of an incentive model there. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit more about our new role-based network that we implemented a couple of years ago. Kind of on the back of the policy library that I talked about earlier, we built up this role-based network security architecture around a series of roles that are based on risk classification using the CIA triad, the confidentiality and integrity, and availability of systems. Our new unified network also implements this concept of microsegmentation, which is kind of an emerging every time I practice it, I say emerging best practice in the network world that basically within a network VLAN prevents lateral communication between devices within that VLAN. So with this microsegmentation policy in place, we previously had one or multiple VLANs per building for those 325 plus buildings across the university, and we were able to collapse that down from 800 to less than 150 VLANs with the new network model. That microsegmentation really is there to prevent lateral spread of malware within a VLAN. So it's really protecting those endpoints from the outside. We also, kind of to help users and workstation support technicians, sysadministrators make determinations about what risk category does my device, service, data fall into. We developed this risk classification self-assessment tool that's really just a series of questions built around that CIA triad. And then depending on the answers of that, we take a high watermark approach. So if your availability turned up being a high, but your confidentiality and integrity were both low, you're still going to be a high because of that DRBC requirement. So we're using the same low, medium, high risk level approach and applying it to a number of different things. So looking at users in terms of low, medium, and high, devices, network roles, and network resources. And this kind of gives us a real nice common language that we can talk about different entities with those same words. So you might have seen earlier on a slide I had on there, user plus device equals access. And this is kind of how that all works out. So I'm just going to give you some examples here. So in this first one, I have a user who's coming in the untrusted role, and so they aren't even making it into the low, medium, high yet. This could be a university guest who's just come onto campus and signed up for a guest access account, or someone from one of our Eduroam peer institutions who's coming in and using their Eduroam credentials to get onto Wi-Fi. They're obviously going to be using their own BYO device. So that works out, untrusted plus any device. We're going to drop you into that level 1 category, the untrusted category on the network. And from there, you only get public resources, including any university resources that public. But basically, it's just internet access. This example is looking at a university employee. So pretty much for the most part, all university employees are automatically in that medium risk category just because of the access about student information that they have. And most of their kind of one-to-one assigned devices are also going to be in that medium risk category. So again, medium plus medium equals medium for their network role. And then they also have access to network resources that are identified as medium or lower. It waterfalls that way. This is kind of a more interesting one. So this situation probably shouldn't happen, either for physical security or policy on the endpoint. But let's pretend that a student who's classified as a low-risk user has found themselves at a faculty workstation that is classified as high risk. So they sign in with their own credentials, and the network gives them low risk because we take the lowest risk, and that's what the network says, okay, that's all you got. So even though the device is classified as high because a low-risk person signed in, it's only ever going to get low. And then they only have access to low-risk resources. So a lot of the information that we're using to drive this is coming from outside sources, including Jamf Pro. So we have an integration in place between our network and Jamf Pro. Our new network is built on Aruba technology, so we're using the Aruba ClearPass Policy Manager. That's kind of the brains of the network operation. ClearPass keeps its own internal database of endpoints that it has seen. It keeps details that it's collected about those devices from their DHCP fingerprint. But then we can also feed in information from other outside systems, such as Jamf and our identity management systems. So this is the component of the network that is actually making that user plus device equals access calculation. On the Jamf Pro side, all of our devices are submitting at least daily inventory, depending on policies that might be happening more often. So we've got a lot of data about them in Jamf. And then we built smart groups within Jamf to look at the criteria for what's a low device, what's a medium device, what's a high device, what security requirements as part of our endpoint baseline do each of those meet or need to meet in order to be in that category. We also built failure groups for each of those individual categories to make it easy for workstation support technicians or our network operations teams to identify, I was expecting this device to get a medium risk network role, and instead it's only at low. What happened? So we've got those groups, and I'll show a little illustration of that later. And then for our kind of special roles around research or production use machines, we want to really specifically limit what devices can be part of those roles. And so in those cases, we're using a static group to, identify the devices, but then it feeds into a separate smart group, so we're still doing the baseline security checks. All right, so all of this kind of works together based on the Jamf Pro extension for ClearPass, which is something that we just got from Aruba as part of the product. It leverages the Jamf Pro API to pull that information from Jamf into the ClearPass endpoints database. The first version of the extension that we implemented actually just went to Jamf and said, give me what you got, and it did a complete scrape of the database often. Well, I mean, too often, and it was really, really hard on Jamf. So last year, they introduced an update that includes a webhook. So now when a device submits inventory to Jamf, it fires off that webhook, and ClearPass selects or tells Jamf, give me the details for just that one specific device. And typically, we see within a minute or two of Jamf having new inventory information that's reflected in ClearPass. So we have pretty up-to-date information within the network to make those calculations. So what happens when a Mac connects to the network? How are we actually making determinations? And this might be a little hard to read from the back of the room, but I'll illustrate as best I can. So ClearPass is going to assign a number of roles to a device when it connects to the network. So here in the circled area, you'll see I've got some network access roles. Those are the user information within our system. And then we've also got machine access roles. Those are the device information within the system. So this user actually qualified for level 10. That would be our ITS infrastructure group. I'm the user. So in this case, though, the machine only has a level 2, so that would be a low risk designation. And I was really expecting my device to get me into the ITS infrastructure role. So what happened here? All right, so if we flip over and look at the information from Jamf here, we can see because of those failure groups that we built out, ClearPass failed, File Vault not enabled. So, well, apparently I turned off File Vault, and that's why I'm not getting into the role that I was expecting. So this is how our workstation support teams can really self-troubleshoot these kind of network access issues. We've tried to make it easy on them. So that's kind of the end of my look at the network, and now I'm going to hand it over to Quentin to talk about some baseline security stuff.
Cool, thanks, John. All right, so I'm going to dive into a little bit more about the baseline security of macOS specifically, since this is a Mac conference. It's only fitting. Obviously, our Windows side does, something similar, but I'm going to talk a little bit about, what goes into kind of getting that low, medium, or high risk status and the data that's being passed on to ClearPass a little bit. But before I do that, I kind of want to overview our NU Jamf environment. So we support across those 3 campuses about 5,800 macOS endpoints. There's some iOS endpoints, quite a few in there. We don't need to talk about those. But within our Jamf environment, we have 81 Jamf Pro sites. There's very obviously some room for some consolidation there. And within those 81 sites, across those, we have about 43 unique support areas that in some way interact with Jamf Pro. So that could be mobile devices only, or maybe they support 10 Macs. I think the most a site has is maybe like 1,000. So we have a range of support there for different folks across our support areas. Getting into the baseline security of it, the kind of the elements that go into checking that posture assessment for the device. We've got your OS patching. So we're doing standard software deployment, like John said, in our baseline, but we're also doing patching. We're doing OS patching as well, or to the best of our abilities. And additionally, we're doing file vault encryption. We're requiring that on any machines that are medium or high risk. And then the big thing is the minimum security controls, setting the device classification and applying those controls. So for the standardized software deployment and patching, our common core third-party apps that we kind of see, your Office, your Firefox, Zoom, you all know that's kind of a common deployment. We're kind of doing those by default along with our required apps, our security apps on enrollment. So on top of that, if something misses enrollment or it loses an app, we're using Jamf Pro to redeploy security apps, our security scanning tools and whatnot. And then in addition, we're doing Jamf Pro patch definitions. Today, we're not really, if you're not in compliance with like Chrome, we're not necessarily knocking you off the network, but we have the flexibility to potentially degrade your network level if necessary. You have a Chrome vulnerability and you haven't updated in a month. We can potentially do that with this system. One thing I forgot, I guess with OS updates, we've kind of been in a transitionary period. John recently put together Nudge, and in the areas that we've started testing, it works pretty great. There's some quirks with secure token right now that we're kind of working through, but that's also kind of on our roadmap to deploy university-wide. The file vault encryption piece, I won't dive into this too much, but we are requiring that on medium and high-risk endpoints. So anybody that's a staff member and interacting with university data of some sort, we're putting into those, we're putting file vault on and requiring that as a posture check. So really not too much more to say there, but it's kind of slow going a little bit. Again, there's kind of some secure token quirks there in our environment. So we're slowly working with our distributed IT and client services groups to kind of get their devices on par with where we want them on the network. And then the meat and potatoes, the security compliance project is something we've used to implement our minimum security controls. Just curious in the room, how many of you went to the demystifying session or workshop? A couple of you, great. And additionally, how many of you are in higher ed? I'm curious on that. Okay, cool. It's fitting for the session. So yeah, if you don't know what the macOS Security Compliance Project is, it's an open source project, and it's honestly, it was super timely for one of our goals here, which was to build out a security control baseline. I won't get into the technical specifics too deep. That's for another person, but I will talk about our experience with implementing a bit. So the great thing, so the Security Compliance Project is a joint project from NIST, NASA, DISA, and LANL, LANL. I don't know if people say LANL. It's derived from several different security standards. And what how it's been explained to me is there was kind of a need in the community to come together with all these different standards that we're doing checks and assessments very differently and kind of bring them into one standard. And this does that very successfully. Another great component of this is it's used to create a customized security baseline. So there are within the project some standards that you can implement. You can do NIST 853, you can do 800-171. Those are kind of built in. You can customize those to kind of fit your organization better, or you can create completely customized security baselines based off of your need, which is something that we did. We took the full set of controls, and we kind of tried to decide, okay, what is low, what is medium, what is high, based off of 853 mostly. We kind of made that fit our organization a little bit better, because there are some things that, we're not going to use smart cards across the board. If you rip away everybody's AirPlay, or not AirPlay, but AirDrop, they're going to be mad at you. So, for the most part, those things are still available on the medium level, which is where most of our endpoints are. But yeah, I'll kind of get into the specifics of kind of what we're doing in each of those levels a little bit too. And I did mention the Common Core technical controls. The macOS base, or the minimum security controls, the MSCP, is based in YAML and Python. So all the rules are built out in YAML. If you have a need for custom rules, you can make them yourself. If you want to deploy a configuration profile or a script through those and build your own kind of control mechanism, there's the flexibility to do that because one, it's open source, and two, it's made for you to have some flexibility. I would say you need to know some Python to use it, but there are lots of resources through the GitHub that kind of get you started, and I would say maybe you need to know minimally to start playing around with it. But I'm comfortable with Python, so maybe that's maybe that's different for you. The control mechanisms when you generate these baselines. So you kind of plug all your controls in. You generate the baseline. It's going to kick out configuration profiles, scripts, and then there's some manual actions required for some of those baseline assessments too. Configuration profiles, first and foremost, are kind of the most the strongest action, right? We can keep things at a baseline. We can set them as kind of a desired state, and it stays that way. That's how configuration profiles are designed. Scripts kind of fill in the holes for the other pieces, right? They add to kind of our arsenal of controls, and then there's manual actions. I would say a good example of that is maybe file vault encryption. There's some sort of like manual step to take to resolve that. Typically, in some ways, I guess it can kind of be automated, but And there are other examples of manual actions. Like SIP protection is another kind of example of that. So I'll share some resources that I know about. There are many more online, do your searching. But the MSCP wiki page is a great place to start. That has, introductions and how-tos, and that's where I started. That's where I kind of started on this and started looking into and implementing and got to a state where we could test and deploy into our environment. Another one that our first time around, we did not use the Jamf compliance editor. I wish we would have done that. Instead of, our process was generating all the controls, generating a spreadsheet, going through and picking a designation for them. I wish we would have either known about this or this was available. I'm not sure which came first, if our need for it or the tool came first. But this is a great one to use, and there's some good documentation out there on this to kind of generate a baseline that fits your organization specifically. As far as issues and support go, from what I've seen, the community is fairly active on it. Of course, there's always a Mac admin Slack channel for something like this, and to my knowledge, that's a pretty active channel. People helping each other out, and if I have an issue with a control, if I see some sort of a bug or just unexpected behavior, I go there first and search for my issue, and most of the time, I find some sort of help on that. I know MDM providers usually have some sort of assistance with this. I'm pretty sure Jamf will set up a session for you if you ask to kind of walk you through the macOS security compliance project. But other vendors, MDM vendors, I hope would do the same. And I know, so we put the controls together, and then Apple Professional Services actually had kind of a session available where we did kind of just a free 2-hour session with them to go over the security compliance project. And that was really helpful to kind of set in stone what we already kind of knew a lot of the information, but there were some things that were really helpful in that session. And I think, I'm not sure if they still do that or if they have this option still, but it seems like there was maybe some paid engagement you could interact with to help get stuff started up too. I'm not really sure how that works, but and then the MSCP GitHub bug report page, I've actually used a couple of times. I have an example, but that's a really great place to kind of take your issues. It's an open source project, so they rely on the community to keep this thing going, and it's always important to file your recommendations, put in your bug reports, but do your testing and provide them with lots of information too, and follow the templates provided. So an example of this, back here in March, we started seeing one of our controls fail on a certain set of devices. It wasn't on everything, but it was kind of an identifiable group with a specific OS version. So we took all of those, we took as much information as we could kind of figure out. We pulled the control temporarily just so that the assessment wouldn't fail on folks. And then we filed a bug report. And about a week or two later, Robert, who's one of the individuals on the project, replied with very simply a updated check command, and we'll update this check to this and test. And so we tested that, and it worked. It fixed the issue. All those errors went away. And additionally, they then, about a couple weeks later, merged it into the Ventura branch and merged it into the Monterey branch as well another month later. So that's kind of an example of that experience. I find it really satisfying in some way to know that even my bug report almost contributed in a way. I don't know. Maybe that's, yeah. So yeah, to kind of jump over, we're going to talk a little bit about our implementation a little bit more. So specifically what we're doing for the MSCP. So we have, like John said, that low, medium, and high concept, and it's very much a part of this as well. So our control set for low, medium, and high is an identifier in Jamf Pro. And we're scoping the set of security controls based on that. As I mentioned, we kind of went through and just took a spreadsheet of all the available controls and stepped through them and said, does this apply to our university? And if so, which level does it apply at? Low, medium, or high in kind of what we were trying to target. And trying to model that after like 853 a little bit. We've created audit and remediation policies in Jamf to automatically check and apply the appropriate controls in the case that there are scripts that fail. So, the first time around, a script will run to check your compliance and then remediate that. And it also does checks for the manual items and the configuration profile-based items. So if something breaks, if there's an update and suddenly one of those configuration items is failing, we can maybe address that. So that enablement process looks like this. We have our workstation support areas responsible for classifying the devices. So they know their users, they know what data classification they're going to be dealing with. John mentioned a self-assessment form. We have them fill that out in a lot of cases to identify what risk level maybe a faculty person is sitting at. And for an employee, it's always going to be either medium or high. Those attributes that kind of designate that are actually listed on our nebraska.edu website. And you can actually go see them yourself and see, what constitutes low, medium, and high data, if you'd like. Another thing with this is, we really believe you should eat your own dog food. We applied these control sets to our entire ITS organization within the university in January. It broke a few things, and understandably, mostly with our developers. They were the upset ones in that scenario. Otherwise, it's just some visual changes in a lot of cases. You're seeing new login screen experiences that are, for the most part, consolidated, and a few other quirks depending on your risk level. I think, I'm going to step through. So as you set that target level in our environment, our smart group scoping kicks into gear, and the next inventory or the next check-in your computer does, it's going to run that remediation policy, that audit policy. But the first thing that happens is configuration profiles are going to come down fairly immediately. Sometimes, depending on how happy our Jamf environment is that day, sometimes the audit can run before the configuration profiles run. That doesn't matter. It just is going to change how we see those configuration profile items in our extension attribute that it reports to. But then that audit policy runs. It checks to see which of the script attributes needs to be remediated. And then on the following check-in, a remediation script is ran. I think there are some improvements that we can make to kind of make those flow into each other a little bit better instead of waiting between two check-ins. But with time, we'll improve our process. And then on top of that, once the remediation script is run, you just have manual steps, left to resolve, and then your computer is within compliance. So that baseline implementation, I mentioned, we kind of picked out what worked best for our organization at different risk levels. When we're talking about low risk, that includes about 72% of the controls that we saw applicable to the NU environment. So a good majority of these are being applied at the low risk level. That includes that managed login experience. You're seeing a EULA at the login window. You're seeing the login screen change to username and password. And then there's a little login banner as well that's consistent across the board. There's also things like automatic session lock that's consistent. A lot of these things were in place already, but not consistently. We had distributed units that were, maybe not consuming some of our kind of previous baseline configurations, mostly deployed with configuration profiles, or somebody would have a 15-minute timeout, somebody would have an hour-long timeout. So this really kind of brings it into kind of one consistent behavior across the board. Some other things that we kind of intend to do, in this case for low risk, it's kind of just more of a best practice to default to standard accounts on those machines. Low risk is typically going to be like your lab machines, checkout laptops, things like that, where students are using them primarily. That's kind of the scope of low risk for the most part. Our medium risk internal is 75%, so we're not adding too much more on top of low risk to get to medium risk. The big thing here is now we're requiring file vault encryption. And that, again, is for our faculty and staff users that aren't dealing with high-risk data. This is kind of where they land by default. Additionally, on top of that, we remove the use of guest accounts entirely. So we don't enable guest accounts by default on the low-risk machine, but we certainly will allow them because all they're going to be able to access is public data anyway from that device. And we have some use cases. You have a summer camp where random students are coming in from different high schools. We've found some needs for that, so it's certainly something that works on low risk. Medium risk, we don't want an unknown user touching this machine. And additionally, there's some system application security log forwarding that's happening. There's some quirks with that. We're using Splunk, and I'm not entirely happy with the forwarding yet, but it is getting better now that they have compatibility for the universal forwarder with unified logging. So that's kind of coming too, but that's our intention, is to deploy to medium and high-risk devices some of those log forwarding items. Getting into high risk, so confidential data. ITS, we kind of made that decision to deploy to all ITS folks because you're either in a system administration role, a security role, networking role, or you're a client services person. You're interacting with potentially high-risk data on user machines. You're backing up their hard drives. You're hopefully not using your work computer to do that, but we don't really know or have a standard from our perspective. There are standards around that, but we don't know what they're necessarily doing or what they're going to touch. So we're going to say, by default, you're going to be high risk. And for those users, I don't think we've had much issue. We do have the no default remote access into the machine on that level. I would say that's probably one of the more frowned upon controls, especially for a lot of folks who are used to, at this point, working from home. They're remoting into their work computer from a personal device. For a high-risk device, we've decided we don't want that. You need to either have a high-risk device at home and remote into a work computer that's high risk, and that's an exception even. Otherwise, that's really not allowed at that point. For low and medium risk, we still have that capability. There are use cases out there where that is needed, but additionally, our longer-term goal as we move towards hopefully getting a PAM solution implemented or a PEDM solution implemented is doing more control around data export controls on the machine. So removing the ability to install certain things that could exfiltrate data that we don't want to leave a high-risk machine. What that looks like today, that's still up in the air, but that's kind of on our roadmap a little bit too. And then the goal here is also in the future least privilege. So as soon as we're able to kind of manage a little bit more of what people can install on their machines, we'll have room to get into maybe removing admin access for a lot of those users that still have it in high risk. And then, finally, we kind of added this to note that there are things outside of high risk that we still have to acknowledge. So those regulated areas, we deal with ITAR data, we deal with HIPAA data, PCI, things like that that have a specific contract behind them, have specific regulation behind them to get certain government grants and funding. We might have a different control set for this. They might not even be in Jamf. They might be in a completely separate MDM that's specific for like a Gov cloud environment or something like that. And so this is just going to be applicable to the specific technology as needed. But we acknowledge there's kind of an additional set of controls that we aren't applying at the high level that, if required by either regulation or contract, we're going to fulfill as best to our abilities anyway. Just one second. All right. So kind of the last section here that we want to cover is just a little bit of example tying what John talked about to what I talked about and looking at, after you classify a device, seeing what their network connection looks like. So I have a bit of a scenario for you that we kind of prepared. So in this case, a faculty member has been given a new MacBook that needs to connect to a network drive where high-risk research data is stored. The user has already been provisioned to access to this network drive. So what do we do to get this device on the network and connecting to that specific resource on the network? So the first thing you've got to do on here is classify the device. So this is where we have that extension attribute in Jamf. We've stored it under inventory, operating system, and we just have a simple drop down that somebody can select, low, medium, or high. We do bulk assignments for folks that have a large number of devices they want to classify all at once. We haven't done a lot of that, actually, but people are moving along with the classification process still. I would say at some point our goal is, we're kind of in the midst of our migration process. So at some point, we are going to require all devices to be at a low level. Once we get to that point, we'll kind of rework this a little bit and hopefully either automatically designate everything as low on enrollment somehow, or by default, just everything gets that set. But continue on with the example. So we've set our level to high on this device. Now Jamf is going to distribute the appropriate baseline controls and applications based off of that high level designation. That device is going to return the inventory information, and Jamf measures the compliance with that level. So that's where John was talking about. We have smart groups set up that define, is it meeting minimum security controls? Is it in file vault? Is it on a minimum OS? So we're supporting N-2 in our environment, and then preferably N-2 of the minor version 2 for the latest version of the OS. Jamf is going to trigger that webhook with ClearPass when that device inventory is updated, and it's going to provide updated information into our ClearPass environment. And then ClearPass is going to actually request that information from Jamf. And then ClearPass calculates that posture does that posture assessment, calculates where it should be, and allows the device onto the appropriate network segment. And then finally, when that user, if they're already connected, they might have to re-authenticate to get to a new, to get to their appropriate, network segment. But then once they do that, they're allowed onto that high-risk network, and they're given access to those high-risk network resources. So that's kind of the full picture of it. That's what we came to talk about today. So. I would say, if anybody's interested in kind of further discussion on this, we'll be around the rest of the week, obviously. But definitely feel free to reach out to us. We want to have discussions with people. We want to see how you're doing it. If you're implementing this into your environment already and you have good ideas, we want to hear that. But we'd love to give a presentation again to you and your group at your university and share what we're doing. We love the collaboration, and it's helped us in the past, and we hope we can we can spread the wealth. So And also definitely fill out the feedback. I want to hear what you thought of the presentation. So, but at this point, if anybody has any questions, I think we're happy to answer it. We have plenty of time. Thanks, John.
Is that on? Okay, there we go. I'm sorry you had to go through the pain of making a baseline manually. As the person who made the CMMC level 1 and 2 baseline, I feel your pain. Does Nebraska have state ramp? Is that what caused you to do this, or is it just that you wanted to just get better at your cyber hygiene? Like, what was the driver for it, I guess?
The latter of that, yeah. You just kind of, across the board, just be better, yeah.
Yeah, I think there are enough needs for this type of cyber hygiene. Obviously, this fit really well into our goal of what we're doing with the network and access to resources. And then just, what we maybe perceive is on the horizon and what we think is potentially required in the future. We want to get ahead of the game and put all this on those devices as soon as possible. So.
And lastly, as a person who helps maintain the project, if we have a lot of questions always about minimum education security requirements, because there isn't anything, right? Like, because I mean, the U.S. government has CMMC and there's CIS level 1, but education doesn't have it. So, would be really, awesome, maybe helpful for the community to. I know you said the baselines are available on the Nebraska website, but maybe put in a feature request or a pull request, and if you feel that your baselines might be useful to others, and you can call it something else.
I think we have a lot of interest in that. I think it's at the moment stepping through the hurdles of that and explaining to people that, hey, we're consuming general controls. There's no issue with actually publishing what we're doing exactly on the machine. I'd say we have some folks in our security department that are a little bit, maybe harder to convince of that, but I think we have work to do once we're more comfortable with where our baseline sits. And it is an ongoing process, right? We're still deciding exactly what we want in those low, medium, and high baselines. As we kind of learn more and we spread that, those controls to the institution. We hear feedback from our IT partners across the board, and we've made adjustments for that. But yeah, I totally hear you. I think publishing, that's one of the things the Apple team kind of told us early on is, if you develop your own set of controls, publish those, because other universities are going to use that, and I totally hear that. So
100%.
Thank you.
I think this is a bad question, but I got to ask it anyway.
There are no bad questions.
Early on the slide, you had a slide that showed 800 VLANs reduced down to 150 with 51,000 devices. I cannot stop thinking about potential impacts on broadcast domains. Am I just outdated?
We would have to get some of our networking folks in to discuss that further. But we, I think, sort of in general, are not allowing, devices to broadcast stuff that way. So
Cool. Thank you.
Well done. I guess first, thank you. That was really great and inspiring as a smaller university kind of working towards some of this stuff. First question about your network security and the configurations. What do you do for, are you binding? What are you doing for account creation? How do you connect the user and device in terms of, are you using the ADCS for the CERT, or what's that process?
Yeah, sure. So we are doing MS-CHAP v2 PEEP. So it's based on user authentication, and then the certificate around that.
And what do you do for your user creation, if you don't mind?
For the user creation, sure. So we have. It's all really driven by our people information systems, either the SAP data on the employee side, or I don't actually know what system we use on the the student side. But those systems, when the record gets generated there for either the employee or the new student, then it kicks off a process and the appropriate AD account gets created. So that's all automated on the back end. And then we are leveraging Grouper to pull information out of those information systems to make kind of intelligent automated decisions about, the students are all going to fall into this low group. The employees will be a member of the medium group, and X department is a member of this group, which has access to this specific role on these machines. So Grouper is really kind of driving the people decisions around that. But then ClearPass is actually talking to the Active Directory for the authentication. Yeah.
And then how much do your end users know about this process? Like you mentioned kind of like if I can't have access, are they just saying like, hey, I can't access this shared drive, or do they know enough to say like, hey, I'm medium, but I need to be high?
I think that's kind of, it varies depending on maybe what their direct IT support, how in the know they are. I think that's a kind of room for improvement that we have is kind of that interaction with end users. I don't think we've necessarily solidified that. You would know based off of like your IP range, but the non-technical users aren't going to know that. So I do think there's room for us to improve there, and we've tossed around ideas internally. But yeah, that's still kind of I guess a hill to climb.
Yeah, I would agree.
So you guys had a ton of sites, which doesn't really scream centralized environment. So, the tech part is fairly easy for us who deal with it. How do you deal with the eventual political roadblocks that come up? No one's going to touch my stuff, or do you have power or scope to do that to all the machines?
No, I can speak.
Oh, go for it. Yeah.
Something I wanted to kind of mention in the presentation, but I forgot to, is that policy drives this. Like, you have to have your president's office on board. For us, that is the case. I would say we've done a lot of work and had those kind of political discussions. The politics of IT have been a struggle for years, and just now with the new kind of EM16 is the updated EM16, Executive Memorandum 16 from our president's office that updates the requirements of technology on campus. That is really kind of the driving force behind all of this. We wouldn't have been able to do this change without that behind us, the policy. And so I think if you're looking to kind of push this and we're light on our toes where we can be, but I think you really need that driving force to kind of bulldoze over the people who are like, I don't want to change. That's kind of a difficult area. So, but that I totally hear you. That is something that we've dealt with for years. Do you want to add anything on that?
Well, that's absolutely right. And none of the changes that we've been able to implement over the last 2 or 3 years would have been possible without that updated acceptable use memorandum. And if you're interested in reviewing any of that policy stuff, it's all out on our website, nebraska.edu/EM16.
So I think you answered what I was about to ask was like, did you encountered that you had to make these policies, or were they in place before your project started?
They were put together right before our project started. They were put together with primarily our director's input in mind, I would say, and he's part of other folks in ITS at the university that provided a lot of direction in where that policy went. Mm-hmm. The president's office wasn't going to be able to make technical decisions on their own. They need that kind of partnership with ITS. I think another thing with us being a consolidated one IT group, several years back we went through the process of consolidating our central IT. So although we have lots of folks distributed, the core like systems group, security group, networking group, those are all consolidated across our campuses, and that's integral to kind of driving this change too, is that we're all using the same systems and same infrastructure. That really helps. So
yeah.
So I know when you showed in your EA in there, for your low, medium, high, you still had that blank category and said you were working to eliminate that. How are you handling that? Is that just part of the rollout phasing that you still have that category? Is there an actual punishment assigned to that category of least privilege? Are you wielding a stick or a carrot? Like, how are you handling that?
Yeah, we are in the midst of a rollout. Come next spring, we're going to hit a milestone where, yeah, we expect all of the devices to be classified. And like Quentin was saying, I think at that point we're looking at some mechanism or another to say, okay, you haven't classified the device, you're automatically going to get low. Anything new that comes in is automatically going to get low until workstation support tech goes in and adjusts it to medium or high accordingly. So it's on the timeline. Yep.
There's some smart grouping that we've thrown together already to kind of address that. So it works pretty well, I would say. But it's the way we've scoped things is that there is like a smart group built in that we can scope devices to always receive a specific level, and that scoping will take the highest mark. So we have some exclusions in there to pull out, if something's classified as low on the extension attribute, but we have something put into high requirement as in one of those smart groups, it's going to fall into that high automatically. And I think that's one of those things I'd like to share too. Like I want to get to a point where we can maybe publish that logic too. But yeah, I don't know. I think good question. So.
Yeah.
Anyone else?
Hey, thanks. It was great. A question, because you say that Aruba ClearPath is calculating based on the information gathered from Jamf, it's calculating like the level. So that means like you have like obviously like custom EAs. So is it part of the functionality of Aruba to calculate, or do you have to publish certain extension attributes that are expected from Aruba? So what is the kind of flexibility between your custom Jamf work and how Aruba can use it to calculate?
Oh, sure. So what specifically ClearPass is looking at is the group membership. Those smart groups are really what are driving it on the Jamf side. And then, when the webhook fires, ClearPass pulls those group memberships into its own ClearPass database.
Okay, so the extension attributes are to calculate the group membership, and then
Right.
So there's no calculation on Aruba side. It's just like group membership.
Right. Yeah. Yep. Exactly. The extension attributes are only used within Jamf. There is, I guess, one other extension attribute that ClearPass is looking at, and that's the all Mac addresses.
Yeah, the Mac address.
I think I glazed over that. I'm sorry. It was on the slide, and I didn't talk about it. So yeah. As part of that Jamf Pro extension for ClearPass, it includes this Jamf extension attribute that you can either create yourself, or as you do the install, if you give it permissions, it will create that EA for you. And the original version of that collects all of the MAC addresses that are attached to that Mac device at the time inventory runs. And we wrote kind of a custom version of that, so there would be a little bit of permanence for MAC addresses of maybe like a USB adapter or a laptop dock. So, on a Friday, faculty member's machine does its inventory update when they're in their office, but then the next day they're home and it does it, and they're no longer attached to that MAC address. Then when they come in on Monday morning, they might not get the network level that they were expecting because that MAC fell off. So that was the custom thing that we wrote. But that is specifically just looking at the extra MAC addresses, so that we're collecting both the Wi-Fi and any external or Ethernet MACs.
So just just because I'm not a network expert, but I'm just asking. You said you do authentication using MSCHAP v2 and stuff like that. So you have like a TLS, so certificate. So it's not enough. So on top of the certificate, you are looking at the MAC addresses of the devices?
Yeah, so within the ClearPass database, everything is identified by a MAC address. So that hardware component in ClearPass is identified by that MAC. And then we're actually doing PEEP instead of TLS for MSCHAP v2. So it's user credential based as opposed to the certificate based. Yep. So those two things combined, what ClearPass knows about that MAC address and what AD tells us about that user when they authenticate. That's how we make the calculation.
Any other folks?
So it's based off of, I guess, inventory updates, right? So potentially a user, if they're in the wrong, could be out for 24 hours until the next update. If something changed in their security posture, but then they straightened it out by the end of the day, would be at next recon, right?
Right. Yeah. So in those situations, our workstation support would tell them to go into self-service and click the.
So you have a policy.
Inventory.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. Exactly. So we have that on-demand policy, which is kind of hard on Jamf, but it helps us out of those situations when we need it. Right.
But the webhook's fast enough where as soon as a recon's run, ClearPass will. Or within
like 2 minutes.
Okay, wow.
And then they would need to re-authenticate to the network again to get to the appropriate level.
Okay.
But yeah, that connection between Jamf and ClearPass is really snappy. They don't have to wait very long.
Anyone else have a question? We have about 9 minutes left. Seeing none. All right. Well, like we had said, submit feedback for the session. Come up and talk to us here. We'd love to have a conversation. Appreciate it.